Portal is a game that requires no introduction. What was once touted by Valve as a bonus feature of their 2007 game compilation The Orange Box became a game that is still celebrated and acknowledged today as one of the best video games ever created. So of course, after the sequel's success in 2011, it was only inevitable that Valve would begin planning and working on a brand new Portal game. Get that fan-made logo out of my face, you are never real, and you never will be! Sorry. Instead of making a new mainline game, Valve took an interesting approach with the Portal series, which involved making 2 tech demos, publishing a third, and allowing for the franchise to be incorporated into 2015's LEGO Dimensions. Now, while all of this small stuff is fine, people were still clamoring for a brand new, full Portal game. And they would get their wish in 2017. Not with Portal 3, but with a spin-off title called Bridge Constructor Portal. In this episode of Cartridges and Consoles, we'll dive into what can be considered the first new Portal game since Portal 2, and see how it is a worthy inclusion to the Portal franchise by providing the same flair of the mainline games with a vastly different game type. Now, despite Bridge Constructor Portal having the Portal name and franchise attached to it, it is actually one of only 2 Portal games not developed by Valve, and the only one that's not published by them either. The game was instead developed by Clockstone Studio and published by Head Up Games, which prior to this have worked together on several other games in the Bridge Constructor series. Valve only licensed the property to them for this single game. Speaking of, the Bridge Constructor series, which got its start in 2010, revolves around the concept of creating bridges so vehicles can safely cross a chasm, river, or the like. In this entry of the game, you are an employee at the Aperture Science Computer-Aided Enrichment Center, reassigned to a trainee in the role of Chief Custodian for the Aperture Science Vehicular Hurdling Initiative. This role involves having to create bridges so that forklift-certified employees can deliver cargo within the Aperture Science facility. There are 2 tools you use to create these bridges: normal scaffolding, which can be converted into roadways for vehicles to drive on, and super cables, which can be used to support bridges from above. In order to beat every level, a limited number of vehicles, mostly around 1 to 2, has to successfully cross your bridge and make it to the exit point. However, once you complete that requirement, you have an optional convoy challenge that sends out several vehicles to test your layout. As you go through and make bridges in the facility's 60 chambers, you'll be introduced not only to Aperture Science's trademarked portal system, but also to other mechanics and objects from the core games, including companion cubes, energy pellets, turrets, and even the propulsion gels from Portal 2. Now, one thing that makes the game stand out is that it could have been easy for the developers to just tack on the Portal IP on this game and call it a day. However, they instead went the extra mile to really make this game feel a part of the Portal franchise. Between the art style being similar to that of the trailers and instructional videos for Portal 2, the constant references and Easter eggs, and the dialogue that feels like it was directly ripped from the Portal games, there is a very strong integration of the Portal franchise, showing how much charm and passion was put into the game. Heck, Clockstone was even able to get in touch with voice actress Ellen McLean for this game, where she reprises her role as the killer robot, the very helpful artificial intelligence system and overseer of the Aperture Science Enrichment Center, GLaDOS. Oh, thank God. This level of integration in this game makes the Portal franchise feel much more than just a basic premise, and instead makes this entry of Bridge Constructor feel almost intertwined with the mainline Portal games, and gives off a sense that this is more than just a simple spin-off. Alongside this, the gameplay is surprisingly very simple to learn, yet also has its fair share of challenge and allows for a lot of potential solutions. You are gradually introduced to the different concepts as you go through each test chamber, and while there is obviously an intended way to beat these chambers, you can experiment with different solutions and somehow find one that works just as well, if not better, than the intended way. This idea of having multiple solutions is emphasized by the absence of a budget for your bridges. In other Bridge Constructor games, you have a strict budget you have to adhere to in order to pass a level. But in Bridge Constructor Portal, you have no budget restrictions of any kind. The amount of money you spend on your bridges is tracked, but there's no requirement to keep the number below a certain threshold, meaning you're free to spend as much money as you want on your bridges to find success, and there's no added stress to maintain your costs. This also makes sense in lore, as it is demonstrated in the mainline Portal games that Aperture Science is definitely the type of company to heavily overspend and not care about budgets. The biggest complaint I have about the game, however, is the somewhat clunky controls and interface. Now, I'm playing the Nintendo Switch version, and I can easily tell this game was not meant to be played with a controller, as the controls are a bit wonky and take some time to get used to. This does make some sense, as this game, like every other Bridge Constructor game, was developed with PC and mobile in mind first, and this is supported by the fact that it didn't hit consoles until 3 months after its initial launch. That being said, however, from playing the game with the Switch's touchscreen, some attributes do still feel a tad bit off in this control scheme. Trying to move parts or delete a part, for example, can be somewhat of a pain, and the latter is especially annoying as it requires you to double tap the part in question, while at the same time converting a scaffold into a road requires 1 tap. You can see how that can be a small problem.
Oh, come on, really?
This isn't a groundbreaking issue, however, it can't help but get on my nerves that 2 of the 3 main control methods used to play this game have different positives and negatives attached to them. I also personally wish that the game's interface had more helpful quality of life features. Unlike some of the other Bridge Constructor games, sometimes the levels require you to build bridges in a unique way to allow for a precise jump or something to work properly, and such a process can come with a lot of trial and error. There is a test mode to see how your bridges hold up before any vehicles go over them, but there's nothing to see how your past drive or convoy attempts went after exiting those modes. While again, it's not a deal breaker, having something like a rewind feature or even silhouettes of the carts similar to what Mario Maker has for its level editor would have made the experience better and could have helped reduce the amount of trial and error required. On top of this, it also feels like the basic concepts you're taught in the game are introduced to you a little too fast. By the halfway point, you've basically been introduced to every unique mechanic and have been taught everything you need to know. While this is good that the basic tutorial-like levels are covered pretty early in the game, this does make it that outside of the unique designs, the remaining levels feel a bit more repetitive, and as a result, it can cause a lack of interest to really complete the game. Overall, Bridge Constructor Portal is a welcome spin-off of the Portal series that does a really good job of becoming a part of the franchise it's attached to while simultaneously feeling unique in its own right. There is a clear level of charm and passion for the Portal series, which is heavily demonstrated within the familiar aesthetics, the witty dialogue, and the constant Easter eggs and references to the mainline Portal games. In addition to this, the gameplay is also very enticing and provides a good amount of challenge for any type of player, whether you're a Bridge Constructor master or a newbie who just happens to be a fan of the Portal games. While it's definitely not a Portal 3, and there may be some small issues with the somewhat clunky controls, an interface that leaves a bit to be desired, and a rushed approach to the core game mechanics, the game still is a welcome one for anyone to try out, especially if you're a fan of the Portal series. Bridge Constructor Portal gets my rating of 8 cartridges out of 10.